Okay, so I just want to kind of show a sample deployment because I was getting a little frustrated with how much resources and time it takes to use Minikube. So this is an alternative. Some things work really well in it. It's very lightweight and you can spin up and down clusters for Kubernetes pretty quickly. It's pretty comparable to like what you would expect from a Docker workflow from the dev environment. So this is just a completely fresh mint VM that has the VM extensions in it and basically nothing else. So let's just go ahead and start here, and I'll just jump into tmux so I can work a couple things at once. First thing, this doesn't even have Docker installed on it, so the package that I'm going to use is k3d, which is basically a Dockerized helper around k3s, and that's a project that's supplied by the Rancher project. And it's a pretty decent distribution for Kubernetes. So the basic idea is I'll install some of the tools that you normally use for Kubernetes. So the first of those being kubectl. So we'll install that on our host box. These are all just kind of the recommended installation for these tools. So these are easily found on the website, but I'll dump them in the sample project for examples that we have down there as well. The other tool on the local box that you typically use is Helm. So Helm will be kind of the package manager if you want to install pre-configured and applications into your cluster. So between those two things, there's a third program that I find just kind of helpful, so I'm going to go and grab that as well. And this is just basically to help with forwarding. So if you have a cluster that you don't want to expose on your public IPs, this just basically will give you something that looks reasonable and you can interact with multiple hosts on the same local host, and it will bind to different things inside of the 127 addresses. So I'll show a little bit of that later. So Helm's done and installed. Make sure that that command works, and that's good. Just give this correct permissions on kubectl, and that'll be done. So right off the bat, we can go and get namespaces. Right now, there's no server that the utility is pointing to, so kubectl really doesn't do anything yet. This is actually not the... Actually wanted the Debian package for this forward. So as we wait for that, we can go and pull this. And install it. Well, I can install it as soon as apt-get gets complete. Okay, now that Docker's done, I can go and install this Debian package, no problem. Let's close these down for now. Now the next thing that I need is the actual k3d project, and that's our little Rancher Kubernetes cluster. So this will also be on the local box as well. I could have grabbed that earlier. Okay. So now that that's there, you basically, it does a pretty good job of showing you the commands that you have. I'll go through a couple of them. Create and deleter, mainly you're bringing up and down clusters. You can give them a name if you want. In this case, we'll probably just take the defaults. So if I go and create a cluster, this will basically pull this Docker image down, and then it'll launch it, and this is what k3s is inside. So if you really wanted to do this, you can install k3s locally too, and it's really not a bad way to go, except when you need to go and refresh the cluster. So this will take a minute, so let's give this a second. All right, once this launches, you get a nice little output here, and this is basically, if you run just this part of it, this is a little wrapper so you can switch which cluster you're pointing to in case you're doing multiple, but this will just give you a kubectl YAML file, and then setting this variable allows kubectl to know which config file to go to. And with that, now you can see that we have a running cluster, just your normal stuff in there. So from here we can start deploying things. Let's just take a sample chart from here. Let's go with Jenkins, even though it probably takes longer to boot than I'd like it to, but so the main commands are basically inside of Helm. You're simply going to add the correct repo. Then, after your repo has been added, then you go and install the resource. Here I have to add this little tag because I'm using Helm 3, which just came out. So at this point, you'd be able to port forward this. I'll show using the kube forward that I downloaded earlier to do the same type of thing. It'll take a minute to boot up, so we're not going to look at it quite yet. But inside of the default namespace, you're getting a Jenkins server that's spinning up, and you can see it is still starting up. So while it does that, let's just show a little bit of what happens if you wanted to do a custom application, because doing things with a private repo, Docker repo, is a little challenging in some of the setups, so this kind of simplifies things and makes it nice and streamlined if you're doing development. So this little Docker image is just a sample little thing that doesn't do much of anything, honestly. So if I do kube forward here, service, this just basically takes all of your services and forwards them into your local box. I first need to create a service around this deployment that I've made. So I make a deployment that's running this image, and then I expose that that pod over this port. Now kube forward will recognize that service running, and then just basically give me a little, well, if you look at Etsy hosts, you can see that it's basically routing this IP to this host name, which is inside of your cluster, right? And it's pretty convenient. So all that little Docker container does is outputs this info. Now if I did the same thing and gave it something that I built, so if I was working on some application and I called it localbuild 1.0, obviously need a different deployment name here. Then when I look at my pods, right, you see that it can't pull the image. It doesn't know what local build is. In fact, it isn't anything right now. So let's just tag this as local build, really just aliasing it. Now my local daemon didn't actually have that service yet, so let's pull that down into my local Docker daemon. So now when I do Docker images, that shows up there, and then the k3s that is running the k3d stuff is there as well. But here's your application. Now we go and tag that as local build, and if we look at the options in K3d, it's got this super convenient Docker images, and then you just give it command line options or comma separated list of images in your local daemon to then push to the k3s cluster, which has its own little repo running there, which is like containerd. Okay, so now we're pushed, and if we go and get our pods, we're running there too. So now we can do the same thing. I mean, there isn't anything really interesting. If I forward this again, now we also have, well, if I did an expose on that, same thing. You can kind of see the power of the forward stuff, because now I can actually bind, if you're doing just like kubectl forwarding, you'd have to resolve these conflicts some way because they're on the same port. So this actually is pretty convenient, so that I can have something on server 1 but also something on server 2. And you can actually see the host names do change for that, so they're running in different pods there, but otherwise pretty identical. Conveniently, Jenkins just happened to finish, so let's just take a quick peek at that as well. In this case, it isn't a very friendly name, and that sometimes happens with Helm, honestly. But sometimes you end up with a little bit of control over what you name these hosts. But anyway, in this case, it's this is the name of the Jenkins service. So let's bring up Firefox real quick. And you can see that Jenkins has been deployed into there as well. So that's just a nice little streamlined way to get a cluster going. Helm will work. Honestly, in comparison to Minikube, I think it's way faster than Minikube for me in my experience. And then you can basically Helm install the Kubernetes dashboard just from a Helm chart, or they have instructions on their main page. Right now, I think it's a little bit in flux because of the newer version of Kubernetes, and there's a release for the dashboard coming out, so it's a little bit more challenging with some of the permissions, but that'll basically give you most of the features that you have in Minikube in this environment as well. All right, thanks for watching. Hopefully that was useful.